just piggybacking on what you just said, Evan, you've been talking a lot recently about obviously listening to the athlete for their feedback where it's warranted, but then trying to be very clear on what you're trying to measure as outcomes, and can you actually attribute any change to a given training protocol, and why can you draw those conclusions in a fair way, maybe using a bit more data and some of the tech that you've been using recently, right, Evan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And it's one of those weird things, because I know the like hip thing and like coaching in the human performance world is like I'm the athlete-centric coach, and like I take in the athlete's feedback and all these different things. And I do think there's importance to that. But at the end of the day, I also think that human perception tells us almost nothing about underlying physiology and limiters. And I would love to talk about this more in the next few months once we could publish this data, because it's unpublished right now, so I could only explain so much. But we have pretty complex mathematical models using physiologic measurements in live time that allow you to predict time to exhaustion in like a mixed pace and mixed terrain activity within like 2 to 3 seconds accuracy. So if I was like, hey, Pat, if I get enough data on you, I'm going to have you run a 5K in the woods near my house, I could tell you the fastest way to pace that to get you there. And if you start going too fast, I'll be able to tell you you're going to fail in 8 minutes and 26 seconds. And we have that within a pretty high degree of accuracy, and people's perceptions don't really get you there. And in a way, it's a weird place to be as someone that works with athletes, because it makes a lot of sports deterministic. I think the utility of sports like CrossFit is that they're not deterministic, because you're never going to be able to conceivably collect enough data to make those calculations that robust. Like it takes a lot of work to be able to model even someone running that accurately. So the idea of doing it with CrossFit and the amount of money you would need to spend to do that, it's unreasonable. So I think we almost need to like think about what the role of sports are in general. Like, what is their utility in society? What are we trying to get out of them? Because at the end of the day, like most of the improvements in performance are coming through tech. People aren't happy with that. Once tech gets too good, it gets outlawed. Like Nike recently made a shoe with a 4% energy return. People have been saying shoes could do that for decades. They actually did it, and the shoe got banned. So at this point, like if you've basically outlawed improving playing surfaces in footwear and running, have we hit the ceiling for performance at this point? Or are you incentivizing people to cheat and get like the one way that they could improve performance pharmacologically? So I think right now is like a weird precipice where sports are in a very weird place, and you need to kind of decide like what arbitrary rules you're going to work with. And I don't know, it's going to be exciting to see what happens with all these things.
Yeah. So I just think that it's overall the discussion of today. I think you never know exactly what direction it's going to go in, but I think it was very cool where, we kind of started talking about physiology. And I think that oftentimes what happens is this realization of how maybe poorly we understand physiology still at this point in time. And it's kind of like, once you think you understand something, it's almost impossible to really begin to understand the interaction ramifications and the way that they just confound what you previously thought you really understood. And what I found fascinating is like that, Evan, you're working with a team that created a mathematical modeling for someone running in mixed terrain. And, I would imagine in some ways that it was not, correct me if I'm wrong, but it probably wasn't super physiologically focused in some ways.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The physiologic variability, if you were to try and do it entirely off of physiology, is so large that you just need to get enough data with all these moving pieces to basically create a linear regression model that just says like, what are all the degrees of freedom? And then you could model it. But you're right, like it works and we still don't understand why it works.
And, that's kind of where I've sort of been at from a thought process standpoint for a little while now, which is kind of, I think it's made me less interested in learning about physiology over the last few years, because I think I've found that in some ways the feedback from learning more physiology doesn't really improve what it is that I'm trying to accomplish in either my own training or in other people's training. But finding better ways to be able to measure and analyze things, that to me is really like where I find the greatest value at this point in time. Like, essentially, can I get more accurate in measuring the external output that is being created, and really get close to being able to measure that kind of stuff? And I have the advantage of, working with a software team here in New York City, and we've got some pretty cool stuff that's like coming down the pipe that I get to play around with. But literally, especially for strength training, none of it is based on analyzing what's happening inside your body while you're doing these things. It's just like, hey, what's the load? How far did it go? How fast did it move? And with that, you're able to really standardize training. And you're able to actually get a sense of whether or not the person is improving or not. And what I found you were kind of going into this athlete-centric concept of a coach, and it's like, well, yeah, I'm kind of athlete-centric because I care about what you're doing. Mm-hmm. But listen, like, when you come in and train, this is what we're going to do. And if you're not executing and you're not going in the right direction, it's like, hey, what's up with you? Why did you not improve? And now we begin to kind of unpeel this person's behaviors and life characteristics, and you find out all the things that they're doing that are sabotaging themselves. Because, like, for the most part, like, people are not putting all of the elements together to really give themselves an opportunity to express themselves to the highest degree. Have they checked off their box in terms of really managing food appropriately and fueling their performance? Chances are probably, mediocre at best. Are they really keeping their lifestyle at a stress level that's appropriate for them? No, they've got 6 different things going on that are kind of taking them away. And are they controlling sleep? Are they maximizing that particular thing? There's a lot of factors, that really, once you begin to dig into someone's life, like as human beings, we are just, we're the glaring things that we have in our lives that are holding us back are usually fairly obvious, but people don't tell you about them right away. But if you have evidence that, like, their data isn't moving in the direction that's appropriate, you begin to find out why. And it's usually the same problems that every person has. No matter how much you think somebody has their life together, you dig in there a little bit, you get to know them as a person, and you're like, oh, you're just as much of a mess as I am. I just didn't realize it. I thought you really had your shit together. And then if you just kind of help people, figure their stuff out and make these major whole-scale changes to these large, glaring things, you tend to really help them as a person. And when you help them as a person, they begin to just put more things in order that push them towards their goal. And it's just very rare that you get this, this golden, glowing person that you're training that just literally has everything figured out. And so it's more like, I've always thought of data collection as being important for how you use it to aid people in what's going to really assist them in, being able to regulate different parts of their life and factors that go into that they can make enormous changes and switch things in a direction that's amazing. And ultimately their ceiling is going to be their ceiling, but there's probably 20 different things that are low-hanging fruit that you can strip away from them that have, more to do with getting to know them as a person and figuring out these giant, problematic, repetitive behaviors and habits, as opposed to some kind of minutia that we think of as probably being athlete-centric coaching. Mm-hmm. So that's just, like something that I think swirls in my head a lot, that's hard to necessarily get to in a relevant way in a typical podcast conversation, but I do feel like we transitioned to it really nicely with where we went to today. So, you know, I hope we get to do this again, and maybe it won't be as long before the next one.